Let us start with a word of prayer, and then we'll have Jerry continue our lectures. Our loving God, we're thankful to you that we're here this morning. Maybe some of us didn't get a lot of sleep last night, just pondering on the material from last night, that it really tugs into our soul, it tugs into our heart, and it expands us. And at the same time, it liberates us. It liberates us to be able to come to your presence so freely and continue to identify ourselves in you. And we thank you so much again for Jerry, and we ask again for our hearts and everything, our minds, to be open and ready for whatever we need to hear this morning. In the name of Jesus, amen. Jerry Weber.
All right, good to be with you again. The pressure has already been ramped up because I have been reminded several times that there's no coffee, so you better be really good and keep us awake. So I'm really glad I only have to keep people awake for half the morning, and then we have coffee come in and let the coffee work. This is a real joy to be here. Last year at the end of our our conference that happened just after Lent, about the same time of year, after Ash Wednesday, Victor in Victor's exuberance said, let's do it again next year and every year. And we all said, yeah, okay, yeah, right, okay. And then when Victor calls several months ago and says, no, we really are going to do it again. And so I'm grateful, John, and you and your staff for seeing that this is important and doing this. Thank you. And Victor, for your vision for it. That's great. It's good to see you and make some connections. Last year when we met, I made connection with Barry, and here at Memorial Drive, and Barry was a fraternity brother of my childhood best friend in Tulsa. I went to elementary school, junior high, high school with him, and then he goes to Oklahoma State, and Barry meets him there, and you have your own stories that are totally consistent with who he is, and I have other stories. But it's just, some of these things that happen like that are just really cool, and I love it. So, I don't come to you as somebody who has all the answers. I hope you've already realized that. And I don't come out of, I think I've done some study in some of these things, but that's not the most important thing. I always want to come in these kinds of gatherings as a practitioner, as someone who's tried these things and who's still exploring them and experimenting with them. And so I don't have definite answers. And if you have questions, or if something comes up and says, well, that doesn't really ring true, what he's saying doesn't ring true to my experience, that's okay, that's great. And my encouragement to you is to, whatever question you have or whatever kind of raises up within you, just live into that in your own way. Because all I can do is kind of come and lay out some of the ways that I've explored and some of the experiences I've had, and lay those out for you, not even as a template, but just as a kind of example of how it might be done. And not that I've done that well, or not that I've done that and have gone any particular place with it, but really to encourage you to do your own exploration and to find your own way in the spiritual life, your own prayer, your own spiritual practices. And I think that's the most important thing. And so I really want to encourage you, you don't have to buy everything I'm selling. I'm really not even trying to sell it. I want to spark something in you, or spur something, kind of goad you into your own practice, into your own experience, so that your own life can, you're not living Jerry's life, and I'm not living your life. And the only life that you can deepen in God is yours. And you're not responsible for deepening anyone else's life in God. You can companion with people, walk alongside people, but you cannot do their work for them, and they cannot do their work for you, your work for you. So we each have to do this kind of work on our own, kind of alone, but we also do in the context of one another. So I say that we do this work alone together. Nobody else can do it for you, but we do it in the context of one another. So we do our spiritual work always alone together, okay, if that makes sense. So I want to begin with one of the Psalms this morning on page 4 of your handout. And it's the Psalm at the bottom of page 4. It actually just begins there, Psalm 51:7. So what happens in this psalm, you recognize Psalm 51 as the psalm of kind of repentance and forgiveness, and David's psalm after he's been caught in sin and he's begging for forgiveness from God and created me a clean heart. And there's this one line in chapter 51, verse 7, where David says, or if it's David actually praying this prayer, says, "You love those centered in truth." And I'm praying that one day. I'm reading the psalm and I'm praying it. It happens to come up in the cycle of prayers. If you follow a Benedictine model, it comes up most every Friday, Psalm 51. And so I'm reading and praying these words, "You love those centered in truth." And I just kind of stop there and think, are those the people God loves? Does God only love people who are centered in truth? Or is there a larger, more expansive way to think about that? And so what I did was write about a page and a half of who I felt God loved. And so that's really what the prayer is about. So what I want to do is I'm going to read about the first 3 little stanzas of it, and then I'll just let you read for yourself silently down almost to the end of the psalm, and then I'm going to come back after we've had a few moments of silence for you to kind of read some of these couplets, maybe jot down 1 or 2 of your own that you would say, wow, this is who God loves, and these people who are at these extremes. And then I'll come back and finish off the prayer at the end. You love those centered in truth. You love those centered in truth, the book says, a witness only to part of the truth. But I say more. And besides, you love. Period. Love loves what is as it is. Let my book say, you love what is as it is. You love. Period. Let's look at the poem by Mary Oliver on page 15. Again, it begins at the bottom of the page. It's a poem of several stanzas, and I picked out a couple of them. poem called, To Begin With, The Sweet Grass. Someday I'm going to ask my friend Paulus, the dancer, the potter, to make me a begging bowl, which I believe my soul needs. And if I come to you to the door of your comfortable house with unwashed clothes and unclean fingernails, will you put something into it? I'd like to take this chance. I'd like to give you this chance. What I loved in the beginning, I think, was mostly myself. Never mind that I had to, since somebody had to. That was many years ago. Since then, I've gone out from my confinements, though with difficulty. I mean the ones that thought to rule my heart. I cast them out. I put them on the mush pile. There'll be nourishment somehow. Everything is nourishment somehow or another. And I've become the child of the clouds and of hope. I've become the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. I've become older, and cherishing what I've learned, I've become younger. And what do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know? Love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. Knowing something of Mary Oliver's background as a person, a pretty traumatic childhood, which she had to deal with abuse, which she had to deal with abandonment. And her line, what I loved in the beginning, I think, was mostly myself, never mind that I had to, since somebody had to. It was almost as if she had not been able to love herself and to see herself, the truth within herself, nobody else would have seen it and no one else would have affirmed it. And then the last line where she says, love yourself. That's the place you begin. She said at the beginning of the stanza, what I loved in the beginning was myself. And at the end, she says, love yourself, but then forget that, love the world. And our love for the world, our love for others is always rooted in our own sense of self, our own capacity to love ourselves. Jesus said that, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a one or the other. It's our love for neighbor comes out of this sense that I am also loved, and my neighbor is loved as I am loved. Those of us who tend to be judgmental toward ourselves often have difficulty loving others because we project to others the unlove that we feel for ourselves. And so that's what Mary Oliver speaks to. That's the essence, I think, of what we talked about last night, what spiritual practices and prayer are doing within us. They're tilling the soil in our lives, and they're helping us come to this sense of who we are with God so that we can offer ourselves more fully for the world. So as we begin this morning, well, I put that in there. Probably doesn't fit there as well as I thought it would. This is a daily Lenten blog that I've done for several years, and again this year trying to post something every day. This week, beginning Ash Wednesday, I've been posting some reflections around Beatrice Brutteau and talked about her a little bit last night, but this is the website where those are posted, and if you're interested, there's a way you can subscribe on the website, but if you subscribe, they tend not to come till late in the day on that particular day, so they aren't actually waiting for you. They should be there on the blog itself when you get up in the morning. So we're talking about prayer and spiritual practice as we step into Lent, and not merely practices that are going to last for 6 weeks or so, but we're talking about practices that over the long haul help us to become more compassionate, more merciful, less judgmental, with a deeper sense of our connection with God, this love that is completely unconditional, this God who is known by generous self-giving, always spending God's self. And so what we're wanting to do in prayer and in our spiritual practice is allow our hearts to be tenderized so to speak, by this love. Okay? And the process of being tenderized, something hard or something tough being tenderized, is just a shifting of that metaphor of kind of plowing up the hard pan or the hard soil. These spiritual practices that allow us to put things together rather than keep things torn apart, that allows us to be in union rather than to be separate or alienated, which are big words in our culture now. The ideas and the language of separation and alienation and division. And these spiritual practices are inviting us to put together what has been torn apart. We live in these very tenuous times. I said in a meeting with someone just a couple of days ago, we were talking about kind of in the culture and in the church and all the difficulties and the right and the left and the people who are in the middle and all these places, that what is lacking on every side, whether you identify with the right or the center or the left, what's lacking on every side in the current discourse is love. There is a failure to love on every side. And there are easy examples of that. On the right, the failure to love those who are on the left, especially among those on the right who would claim to be Christians and who would claim Jesus as kind of a model, a demonizing of those on the left. And on the left, this failure to love and companion those on the right. On the left, the ability to be tolerant of most everything except those who are on the right. Right? So this whole idea that they're a basket of deplorables, okay? On every side, the failure to love, the failure to be so tenderized, to have such tender hearts, compassionate hearts, that I cannot see the other simply because he or she disagrees with me culturally or politically or theologically, to see them as a human being, but rather to see them as a caricature of some kind of something else, some kind of movement or some kind of whatever. So this is what our world needs. And it begins, like I said to you last night, our world, your world is the world where you live and the world where you work. And so your responsibility and my responsibilities are in those places. Not to affect transformation in the big kind of universal cosmos, but rather to affect to work toward your own opening, your own deepening life in God, so that as your life is transformed, your near circle is transformed by your loving. Okay? We are each only responsible for the world in which we live, which is where we live and move and have our being. Our neighborhoods, our grocery stores, our workplaces. This quote by Chesterton, speaks to the spiritual life and why so few people begin to engage the things that we're talking about this weekend. He said, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried." These things that we're talking about, largely in the history of the church have not been tried by large, and again, for those of you who weren't here last night, when I say church, I'm talking church capital C, the universal church, the Catholic church, church everywhere. As a people, the church has not tried these things that we're talking about. Tried a lot of other things, but have not tried these things because they're difficult. They're long, slow, messy, and they don't yield immediate results. They take time. And so basically in the church, we have not tried them. Last night I asked you as we began to reflect on 3 questions and just to jot some things down, and I want to use this. And we're not doing table sharing. You're not asked to share what you wrote down. But I want to use it as a jumping off place for where we begin this morning. I ask you to think about, what do you love most about where you are right now? However you would define where you are. It may be that where you are is sitting in that chair in Wesley Hall at Memorial Drive Methodist Church. It may be that where you are is where you are at this season of your life, or where you are at work, where you live. Could be any number of things. And then I ask, what do you love most about what you are doing right now? And you jotted down a phrase or a sentence about that. And then the third question was, what do you love most about who you are right now? About who you are in this moment, at this season of your life. What do you love about that? I sense that that's a more difficult question than what do you dislike about who you are right now. And many of us could quickly go there. For some of us, we have to struggle a little more to consider what we love about ourselves at this place in our lives, at this stage of who we are. So I want to lean into something as a way of talking about our spiritual practice and our spirituality this morning that kind of centers around this where, what, and who notion. I want to talk about these different these different ways in which we interact with our world. So I want to take the where, the what, and the who, and think of them as kind of concentric circles. And I'm just really proud that I was able to create that. I'm just going to admire it for a while, I think. This is, for a guy who has a hard time opening an app, this is really big stuff. Yeah. I'm still not on the Facebook either, so. So actually, these concentric circles come from some work by a woman, an English woman named Margaret Silf, who's written several books on spirituality, but one of her first books was called Inner Compass. It's really a wonderful book about the spiritual life. And she talks about how we live in these different circles. What I have to say about the circles, a little bit different than what she says, but the original idea comes from her. The outermost circle is the where circle. And you might think about the where circle in terms of where am I? Where is my physical location? Where do I live? Where do I work? Victor's going to send the slides to you so you don't have to write all this down, okay? Don't, Joan? Okay, all right. Where am I located politically? Left, right, middle, center? Where am I socioeconomically? Where am I in life? We live at this where circle. All of us have a location, okay? We all have an existence at some place on that where circle. The circle just inside that is the what circle. This is a circle that asks, what do I do? What is my work? What are my roles? What do I expect? What do I believe? All of those what questions. Now, this list under what is not so long because most of us find most of our identity somewhere on this what circle, and what we do, and what our roles are, and what people around us expect of us. In fact, most folks, and even most good church folks, live most of their lives at the where and the what circle. And a whole lot of our life decision, our life discernment, revolves around a kind of where and these where and what questions. Oh, I wonder if I should take this job over there. Well, what will I be doing there? Where will I have to go? Okay? When people have come in to talk to me about life choices that they're faced with, very often the questions they're asking are where and what questions. Do I want to live in this place? That's a where question. Or do I want to live in this place? Still a where question. Do I want to do this thing? Or do I want to do that thing? None of those are unimportant questions. And some of those are very important questions. But my point is, they're not the most significant questions. They're not the heart of the matter. Okay? We can live our entire life at a where on different places in the where circle or at different places in the what circle and never have to do with who we are on the interior. The problem is that every time we make a move on the where circle from one place to another place, from one job to another job, or anytime we make a move on the what circle from doing this to doing that, because we're doing something different, it always feels like progress, like I'm making progress. And people will say that very often. Well, I used to live here and now I live there, so I'm really, I'm really coming along. I'm further along in the process. Or I used to do this and now I'm doing that. Okay? Anytime we make a significant change in life, a kind of change in direction, even if it's just a change in location, it feels like this sense of progress. We can, and very often, as human beings, we will make those kinds of changes in order to distract ourselves from doing the more interior work that asks, who am I? So the who circle begins to ask, if we dig through the where and the what, the who circle asks, who am I? Who am I when I'm alone? Who am I when I can't stop talking? Who am I when I'm not working? Who am I when I stop convincing others who I am? The basic question is, who am I? Okay? What is going on at this who place within me? And then Margaret Silf says at the very center is this core, and she calls it the I am center. When God self-reveals to Moses in Exodus 3, the burning bush, and this bush is burning and speaking to Moses, as the story says, and Moses says, wait, stop, wait a minute, who are you? Who is this speaking to me? And the voice from the bush says to Moses, I am who I am. Now, you have to understand, in the landscape of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures at that time, God had always been reckoned by what God did. God is a warrior God. God is a shepherd God. God is a king. That God was always known by adjectives or nouns, by what God did or what God looked like, what God performed for the people. But now in God's self-revelation, see, all of those other descriptions of God were what the people put upon God. Oh, God's my king, God's my shepherd, God's my warrior, God fights my battles. You get all of that in the Psalms. You get all of that all through the Old Testament. But here, when God self-reveals, God says, what I want you to know about me is I am. I am who I am. And God's self-revealing is essence, is being. Being itself is God. I am who I am. And it was Parker Palmer, the Quaker writer, where I first read in Let Your Life Speak. Parker Palmer said, if that's true of God, and we are created in God's image, then the part of you and me created in God's image, we can each say too, I am who I am. That the core of me is this being, is this I am center that is not made up of what I do. My worth does not come from where I live. My worth does not come from what I do. My worth comes from my center, this place at the core of me where what I would call my I am center, this place of being and essence, what I'd call soul or true self or the God seed. From the Genesis story, the creation story, where God places God's likeness and image into the human being. This is God's seed that lives within us, the imago Dei, this sense of our original self, our core self, our original purpose, our original name. So this is at the center of us, this I am center. Now, it was Ignatius of Loyola in the 16th century who it was the founder of the Jesuit religious order, Ignatian spirituality. Ignatius, in his spiritual exercises, which are a set of ways of meditating and praying with Scripture, that is one way of doing spiritual practice, Ignatius said, God has planted deep within you an original purpose, and your life is about discovering your original purpose. Ignatius says that's the goal of life. to discover your original purpose. In other words, to have some familiarity with the I am center that's at the core of you. To have some sense of yourself as at this who center. Okay? It's easy enough for any of us to identify who we are at the where center and the what circle, but to say, who am I? What's at the core of me? What's the center of my life? To a large degree, the where circle and the what circle are circles of what we do and where we do those things. The I am circle is this sense of who we are in our deepest truth, in our deepest connection with God. And just an aside, and this is Jerry speaking, and my own sense of this from my own experience, who we are at the core of our being, this part of our soul that is connected to God, is always connected to God with a connection that can never be severed. Who you are, and this is what I believe. I'm not quoting somebody else, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but my sense is that who you are in your deepest soul, your truest, most authentic self, is connected to God with a cord that can never be severed. I said to you last night in one of those touch points that God loves you without condition. There is nothing you can say, do, or believe that can change that. And this is what I'm talking about. Now, one of the things that begins to do for us when we talk about prayer and spiritual practice is it gives us the courage to explore some different ways of prayer and some different ways of practice without the fear that we're going to get lost and fall over the edge. That, oh, I'm going to explore too far, and God's just going to cut the cord because, wow, Jerry's gone too far this time. So one of the foundations that I have to stand on when I do this kind of spiritual exploration for myself is that there's nothing I can do that's going to be so far out that's going to cause God to cut the cord to my soul. That I'm always going to be tethered to God. And so I can afford to explore. And I'm encouraged to explore. I'm encouraged to go to the edges of where I've gone before, the edges of what I've known to be true, and to peer out over the edge and find that maybe I can go a little farther. So we have this sense of not a safety net, but just this solid footing on which we stand. That God's not going to dismiss us because we've done something that offended God. That's not what love is. Now, we have this sense in the where and the what circle that kind of then fold into the who and the I am circle, that there are these ways in which we do life, and there are other things that have to do with our being. And so one of the kind of false dichotomies that people will put out sometimes is people will say things like, I'm so busy and I do so much, I just need time to be. I need a retreat so I can go be. Or I need to take more, some quiet time every day so I can just be. And the reality is that I don't think you can make that kind of dichotomy. The old Eastern proverb says that wherever you go, there you are, right? So wherever you go and whatever you do, you're taking all of yourself with you for the most part. So this doing and being, I think we have to find some way and spiritual practices to help us hold these two things together so that our doing is always kind of immersed in or is touched by who we are, our being, what's at the I am center of our lives. The aim is not to have moments in the day when I do and then moments in the day when I be, but the aim is that all of life, 24/7, is kind of this combination of doing and being, so that our being is expressed in our doing, or to say it another way, that our doing flows forth from our being, from within us, from the inner core. All right, so the prototypical story in Scripture about this is the Mary and Martha story in Luke 10. And we're not going to read it, but The story says that Mary and Martha, these sisters, Jesus comes into their home. Martha goes into the kitchen. She's busy and distracted in the kitchen, worried and distracted by many things. She keeps looking over her shoulder to get help from her sister, Mary, and she sees Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, engaging, listening to Jesus, engaged with Jesus. And Martha says, "Lord, tell my sister to help me." Now, the extroverts in the room always get really upset because they say, if Martha's not cooking, we don't eat, okay? And that's true. That's exactly right. If Martha's not cooking, we don't eat. Jesus kind of notices what's going on with Martha and says, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things, but only one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that thing. Now, it sounds as if Jesus is asking Martha to choose between cooking and coming to sit at his feet, the doing and the being. I don't think that's what Jesus is doing. Jesus, the kind of gentle rebuke that Jesus offers to Martha is not that she's cooking, but it's the way she's cooking. She's worried and distracted. She's pulled in a lot of different directions. So she's not only cooking, she's also in a stew about Mary, right? So she's not focused on her cooking. And you get these hints that she's becoming more and more resentful as this scene unfolds, right? So Martha's got a lot going on. So I don't think Jesus is calling Martha away from the cooking. I think Jesus is inviting Martha to do her Martha work in a Mary way. How can she cook in a way that's centered and anchored and inwardly still, so that she's not worried and distracted and pulled and tugged apart in all these different directions, but so that her cooking, and I know we have cooks in the room, always in every room, so that her cooking becomes an expression of who she is. She gives it her attention. It arises from within her. She cooks with love. She cooks to bring people together at a meal. But as it is, she's cooking, looking over her shoulder with this increasing stew, not the stew on the pot, the stew within her, right? So this is the invitation of Jesus, doing our Martha work in a Mary way. Martha, who's worried and distracted and resentful, is invited to take on this way of cooking, of doing, that is suffused with being centered and anchored and grounded and not blown around by the worry and by the resentment. To do our work in a way that is animated with who we are, with our being, and being anchored in this is a practice that is helpful living in the world we live in. Most days, I hate to say, but the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is look at my cell phone and see what's crazy going on in the world. What's the virus doing? What's happening politically? What's happening here and there? And I could just get lost in that for an hour. And then before the day's even started, really, I'm already in a stew. I'm already Martha. So what are the spiritual practices that keep us grounded, that help us to do our work, that help us to do whatever it is we do from a place that's anchored and still? So this is a poem I've been working with by T.S. Eliot for about a month now. And I'm trying to live in this, and in particular, not the first line, though that would apply too. Old men ought to be explorers, so yeah. But the line I'm trying to live into is the third line. Old men ought to be explorers. Here and there does not matter. We must be still and still moving into another intensity for a further union, a deeper communion. Okay? To be still and still moving. And we're not choosing between being and doing, being still or moving. T.S. Eliot somehow in this poetic wisdom says it's possible to be still and to be still moving, to be planted, to be grounded, and still to be walking the path, to be doing whatever it is you do. B, attend to your center and attend to your interior, yourself hidden in God. Don't separate your being and your doing. Learn to welcome the guest of yourself. That's a part of being, learning to welcome the parts of myself that I don't like. Welcome the guest, the person you're becoming, both your own light and your shadows. Stop resisting yourself. Stop judging yourself. Be who you are, where you are, as fully as possible in kindness, compassion, and gentleness. Be still. Slow down, center, stop running. Slow the manic movement that distracts you. We talked last night about the power of slowing, that phrase from Gerald May. Quiet the inner voices that demand attention. Learn the inner silence that leads to a deepening communion. Befriend yourself enough that you can be with yourself and not scare yourself away. Okay? Honestly, that's one of the difficulties that we all experience in silence, that when I'm still, when I can be still, I'm going to see parts of my life that I don't like, and I don't want to face that, and I want to run away from that. And so we have to learn in spiritual practice that these things are going to bubble up. They're going to come up from within me, and I'm going to have to look at them and see them. But I look at them and see them without judging them. And that's a part of spiritual practice too. I'm not going to judge this thing that rises up from within me, that looks ugly, that I wish were gone, that I want to get rid of. I just notice it. I notice that it's there. I befriend myself enough that I can be with myself and not scare myself away. Be still. Don't be afraid to be small and unnoticed and to move in the shadows. And let the anchoring, the being still, prepare you to carry something vital into the world. And then be still moving. Life is a sacred journey that involves movement. Don't stop. Don't ever stop. Sometimes it feels like you will feel like you've arrived. You have not arrived. You will never arrive. You'll always be moving. If you image that as a train that stops at a station and you're tempted to get off the train at the station and build a camp there, or more likely for many of us, we want to build a whole compound there and take up residence at the train station because we feel like that's the ultimate station. Now, you can get off the train for a moment, but you're not at the end of the journey. So don't stop. Don't ever stop. You've not arrived. You'll never arrive. Be a wanderer, exploring but centered, anchored in the really real, tethered at the center, fly a long way out. That's my sense of what it means to be connected at the center to God and then fly a long way out. Move a long way out. Keep going. Let nothing stop you. Rilke says in one of his poems that when God creates us, that's what he says to us. Keep moving, don't ever stop. You will never lose me. God says to each of us as he makes us, keep moving, don't stop. You will never lose me. Okay? So be still and still moving. All right? That's the challenge, that's the goal. So what happens in this life then is this journey through the where and the what toward the who and the I am center is a journey to the middle, to the center of who we are. Now, this is the part that no one else can do for you, but we can do it in the context of one another. We journey to the center. We begin to ask questions about who I am. Who am I? What's at the core of me? Why am I here? What is God's purpose for me? Why did God create me? What are the unique gifts and graces I have that I'm to offer the world? So we begin to ask those questions, and we begin to bore through the what, the where, and the what circles to come to some sense of our I am circle. Not to stay there, not to live there as a hermit, but to go back out into the world, back through the what circle, back through the where circle, but through the what and the where circle differently than we came in. Okay? So this is the work of transformation, and this is the work of transforming your world, whatever your world is. As you do your spiritual work, as you grow in your own prayer, as you experiment with and undertake different spiritual practices, none of that, of course it's for your sake, but none of that is solely for your sake. It's for the sake of the world in which you live. And so your journey back out through those circles is the way that you touch the person at the grocery store, the lady who's walking her dog in your neighborhood, the neighbor who's lost a loved one. Okay? It's the way we begin to touch our world, transform our world, to touch our world in love. All right? Is this making sense? All right, I want to say one more thing and then we're going to take a break. By the way, Victor will probably say this again. If you want to submit some questions and write questions down, there are pieces of paper on your table, and you can write down a question and give those to him. He will be the gatherer of questions, and if you want to do that during the break, that's fine. We'll have a time at the end of the morning to talk about some of those things. So in all of this kind of Mary and Martha way and all of this diagram, we're simply trying to hold together and not separate things like the where, the what, the who, and the I am. We're trying to hold them together. Remember, spiritual practice and prayer are about holding together, not separating. So we're trying to pull all of this into an integrated whole and not to, this is the part of my life where I go to church, and this is the part of my life where I go to work, and then I have my family and my home, and then I have this. We're holding all of that together. All right? Because many of us kind of live, most of us probably, live as sort of functional atheists, where, this is the God part of my life, and this is the work part of my life, and this is the home part of my life. So how do we allow who we are as spiritual beings to touch every part of life? And that's what we're trying to get at in this. And what I want to say to you now is that we only learn this kind of rhythm, this kind of inward-outward rhythm by experience. I realize, and I'm keenly aware of the limitation of having one person stand here and talk to 85 people about this kind of stuff. I can't convince you of this. There's no book that you can read that will convince you of this. The only thing that will matter in this is you doing your work, your own experience of it. Okay? Now, I might say something that catches your attention and it might kind of spark curiosity in you, and you say, well, I may try something like that. But none of that, none of what I say, nothing that you'll read in a book can ever take the place of your own experience, your own engagement in this. A couple of months ago was reading Paul's epistle to the Philippians. And there were two phrases in Philippians 4:11 and Philippians 4:12 that caught my attention. And the Apostle Paul says in verse 11, I have learned to be content. And he's talking about I've learned to be content in all circumstances, in everything. So he says, I've learned to be content in verse 11. The very next verse, in verse 12, he says, I have learned the secret of being content. And that just, I'm enough of a nerd that got my curiosity. Why did he learn to be content, but then he learned the secret of being content? And so I began to do some study about the word secret. And it ends up that the word secret comes out of what were known as the mystery religions of the time. So the mystery religions were these kind of esoteric religious cults, some of them quasi-Christian and others of them just kind of out there, these cults that had secret initiation rites. The scholars don't even really know a lot of what they believed because they were secret. But they had these initiation rites that if you wanted to be a part of them, you had to go through a period of kind of training, and then they would do these secret initiations that were some kind of experience. The initiations were never about what people knew, but rather they were a kind of rite of passage, a sort of liminal experience that would initiate this adherent into the mystery of that particular religious. So here's what Paul does. Paul borrows a word for initiation that's used by the mystery religions, and he uses it in the context of this translation, which says, I've learned the secret of being content. I've learned the mystery of being content. Now, just the sense of being content, that's its own sermon. I mean, that's a part of contemplative spirituality too. But what I'm interested in here is that Paul says what he has learned, what he's been initiated into, he's been initiated into this contentment by his experience. And not by something someone told him, not by something he had read, not by a conference he went to. He was initiated into this by his experience. And so there's one of the translations down here at the bottom, the New English Bible really gets at this, where it says, I've been very thoroughly initiated into the human lot with all its ups and downs. I've been thoroughly initiated into what it means to be human in the highs and the lows by my experience. Okay? Not something he learned some other way. It's something that he's learned from in his own experience. So this is the secret of being content. I've been initiated in all these things. All human experiences initiate Paul and shape his contentment. So this initiation, what Paul calls initiation, is experiential knowing. Okay? This is finding a spiritual practice, finding a way of prayer, and saying, I'm going to try this for a while. I'm going to experiment with this. And you work with it for a while, and after a while you say, well, this one doesn't fit. That's okay. You just lay it aside, jettison that one, try something else. Okay? I'm not here this weekend to give you a template for how to do that, for which ones to try. But it's okay if you say, this one doesn't seem to be helping me. I'm not becoming more compassionate. It's difficult for me to do. And just because something's difficult doesn't mean don't do it. But sometimes it's time just to lay it aside and try something else. So this is experiential knowing. It's experiential knowing that does not withdraw us from life, but immerses us in life, so that in a sense, life itself becomes our practice. Daily life becomes spiritual practice. Going to the office becomes a spiritual practice. Knowing that you're going to have a meeting with somebody you really disagree with becomes spiritual practice. Knowing that something in the political world that flips your switch is going to happen today becomes spiritual practice. Daily life becomes spiritual practice. Okay? A rite of passage that readies us to move to the next place in life. Naturalist E.O. Wilson, David Brooks quotes this in his book, The Second Mountain. Naturalist E.O. Wilson, he's talking about an experience he had as a child, and it was a traumatic experience, but it was the moment he decided he wanted to do something in his life that had to do with nature. Okay? And he describes the moment not in terms of something he read in a book, but something that happened to him outdoors in the natural world. And he says, hands-on experience at the critical time, not systematic knowledge, is what counts in the making of a naturalist. Better to spend long stretches of time just searching and dreaming. Okay? It's this sense of experiential knowledge that matters. Okay? The last thing I want to say about this is that initiation implies mystery. That in prayer, in spiritual practice, we don't have to be able to explain what's happening. explanation is not as important as experience and engagement. Now that trips some of us up because we want to know what's going on. We want the map that's at the mall that says you are here. Or to use another metaphor, we want to be able to take our own spiritual temperature and see how we're doing. We're not always able to do that. Okay? So we don't have to be able to explain it. There's enough mystery involved because we're dealing with God, who is knowable but beyond our knowing. We're dealing with God. There's enough mystery involved that we cannot explain everything. We have to rely on experience and engagement. Definitions and descriptions of prayer are not as much help as just jumping into it. Walk your own walk to have your own experience of truth and reality. You don't have to do it like anyone else does it. You just do it the way that you're able to do it, that seems like it might work, and then if it doesn't work, you move on to the next thing. You begin, and you begin wherever you are, and you do whatever you can do. Okay? It's just as simple and as hard as that. Okay, so we're going to stop right there for a second. Victor, we'll take a 10-minute break or so, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, we're still waiting. We're like 5 minutes away from the coffee, so before you get up, I just have a quick just question with Jerry, just to kind of give us some time for the coffee to arrive. So
everybody's getting sleepy, so we
I know.
You need to dance.
So put some
I bet he is, I know.
Put some salsa on, and we'll get going. Any salsa dancers here? Just right quick, part of this work, Jerry, I think those of us that have experienced it, I think that is the actual jumping in invitation, just experiencing it.
Right.
So the self-awareness, how do I know when these things are prompting where I need to practice some of the questions or reflect on some of the questions that we did for homework last night? And so for me personally, these are some of the things that prompt me during my life, my daily life. My self-awareness to restore and go into my holy silence is whenever I feel feisty, emotionally drained, physically weary, and hangry. Yeah. Would you agree that those are good indications to...
Yeah, and I would say everybody needs to find their own list like that.
Correct.
Yeah, to find your own list of times. When do I feel like I'm being depleted, I'm low, I'm the hangry thing, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt, when I'm on edge. Okay, to begin to be aware of that, that's a part of self-awareness.
Correct.
So what do I need? And then to find out what replenishes me. Because not everything's going to replenish everyone the same way. For some of us, it's taking a walk. For some of us, it's sitting on a park bench. Some of us, it's reading a book. Some of us, it's taking 20 minutes for a meditative sit.
Correct.
So what is it for you? Well, so much of this is just trial and error. So Victor nor I nor John or anybody else can tell you what to do. You just have to try something and, okay, I got to that hungry, angry, lonely, tired place. I tried this and I was still hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So next time I need to try something else.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I like what you're telling us to invite our own individual experience. So one of the examples that I use, for instance, as a pastor, this is you give out a lot of energy and there's a lot of holding spaces, so it kind of wears you out. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. On Monday is a very crucial day for me because I spend most of the morning going to meetings. And so meetings is a lot of energy of taking in and giving out. So in the middle of the day, I take this holy silence. Why? Because I need to prepare for the evening whenever I'm going to teach my class. Because for me, what I've found out in this rhythm that you're talking about, this trial and error, is that if I don't do that, my class will suffer in the evening. They will get the residue of all my busyness during the day. So that middle part for me has become sort of this halftime where I take this holy silence, where I take this, whether it is going to reflect what I'm going to teach that evening or it's just rest, whatever that looks like. So that way my students in the evening, they get 100% of a restored, what I call Resendiz. And so that is a rhythm that I found through this trial and error that Jerry's talking about. So if that's something that just stay in tune with yourself, I think that's kind of the invitation.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You know, I think there's some limitations to all the Myers-Briggs and Berkman and Enneagram, and I know, you know, people in here are involved in a lot of those things, and you're teaching Enneagram now, I think.
Correct.
But one of the benefits of any kind of inventory like that is if you understand something of how you're kind of wired, it gives you permission to do things in a way that's kind of compatible with your personality, with your Berkman color, with your, you know, if you're an introvert or extrovert, you do these things differently. Depending on your Enneagram number, you're going to do these things differently. And so that's why there's no single template that anybody can lay out there and just say, do this. It's probably why for many years as an introvert, for instance, I said, well, we all need to be doing centering prayer. We all need to be doing some kind of meditative sit. And if you don't, you're just wrong. And because it appealed to me and it was helpful for me as I've come along. But I've come to see that that's not so for everybody, that there are other ways of doing this. So those kinds of things can be helpful in understanding your own predispositions and what might be helpful for you in finding your own spiritual practice. What's my Berkman color, or what's my Myers-Briggs type, or what's my Enneagram number? Now, you can get lost in those things too. And you can become just like, oh, this is all that I am. I'm no more than Berkman Blue. And you know, it begins to define you, and then you begin to see other people as, oh, he's a 6 and she's a 4, and you know, all these labels and categories. But just let it be what it is, and let it kind of be a guide, a template that helps you to discover your own way of stepping into some of these things.
Sure. One of the things that I learned from many years of listening to Jerry's teachings, especially in the Enneagram work, is, and this was key in my life as an 8, it was whatever is that I'm resisting, that's the invitation. That's the invitation to allow it to walk into, because what happens if I walk into that invitation that I'm resisting, the end work that ends up happening is that I grow or mature in something or realize something about myself. Because in the Enneagram work, we're designed with all 9 types. So one of the authors in one of the books says that our Enneagram type is the starting point. So it's not where we're typecast. And so that's the beauty of this type of work, that you learn to hold each other and hold somebody else's number versus impose your number on them. And that's something that's beautiful about it.
Good.
All right, so I did pretty good, right? The coffee's here, right? Thanks. All right, I'm becoming a pro at this. All right.
Go coffee.
Take your break and be nice to each other in the coffee.
So we're still talking about this center of who we are, this I am center. Who am I? Why am I here? And Ignatius of Loyola, this 16th century Spanish, he's called a mystic. I don't think he was all that mystical. He was much more practical than he was mystical. Who writes the spiritual exercises as a way of people engaging God. Most of them have to do with different forms of meditation and praying with Scripture. Really, they were notes that he took about his own spiritual journey, and then his friends and associates noticed that something very transformative had happened in his life. He was totally different, that he had different values and a different way of being in the world, a different way of loving people. And so his friends said, hey, those notes that you took that seem so important to you, do you think I could look at those? Because they seem to be important to you. And they started looking at his notes, and they were all about different ways of reading the Scripture and engaging with a passage of Scripture. And so 4 or 5 of his friends in the Paris seminary began to read his notes and said, you know, this is really good stuff, and we need to make this available to other people. And said, thus was born the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola. Now, one of the key ideas at the very beginning of the spiritual exercises of Ignatius is this notion that Ignatius wants us to think about the flow of our lives and really begin to think about who we are, our original purpose, what he called our original purpose. And we had a slide about that earlier, that he says, deep within every one of us, God has placed an original purpose. And the goal of our life is to discover our purpose and then to live into it. So basically, what Ignatius is saying is that to come to this sense of who I am, we begin to think about the end to which we're moving. So that in every moment of life, we make decisions, we move, we take on spiritual practices, we do our work with that end in mind. Ignatius wants us to ask, what in this moment is going to help me get to the end for which I was created? Who am I? What's my name? What's my original purpose? What's most true about who I am? Who did God create me to be? So this is the big umbrella question for Ignatius. For instance, when any one of us have to make a decision or a life choice, some discernment about something that we're going to do, Ignatius says we always should make that kind of discernment or life choice in the context of this bigger umbrella for our lives. Who am I? What did God create me for? So most of the time when you and I are making life choices, we look at all these details about it. We make a list and say, on the one side of the page, we list the pros, and the other side of the page, we list the cons. Should I make this move? Should I take that job? Should I do this thing? Should I do that thing? And we make our decisions based on kind of a rational pros and cons. Ignatius says we're doing life wrong. We're doing life too narrowly. He didn't say wrong, but too narrowly. If we're only looking at this moment, what seems to be best right now. That we have to throw our lives in the larger context of what did God create me for? What are the special gifts and graces that are in my life? That if I don't exercise them, they're not ever going to show up in the world. That if I fail to live the one life I was created to live, no one else is going to live that life. If you don't live what Mary Oliver calls your one wild and precious life, no one else is going to live your one wild and precious life. Okay? And so the world will lose it. Ignatius says we don't want to lose our lives, but we want to spend our lives to this larger purpose for which God created us. And so, Ignatius is asking us to consider the end for which we are created. Here's another poem in the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot, this one in Little Gidding. T.S. Eliot says, "What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from." That's exactly what Ignatius of Loyola says. You start with the end. To whom or to what kind of person is God leading me to be? Okay, the grammar of that doesn't work out, does it? What is the end for which I was created? What Ignatius would call my original purpose. So that then all of my living is moving me toward that original that purpose for which God created me. I'm even more proud of these graphics than I am the one that's earlier today. Not this one, but wait till you see the next one. So some of you are just shaking your head like, really? So if this box represents where I am now in life, and this box represents my end, kind of where life is headed, most of us would like to think that there's kind of a straight line from where I am now to what my end is, that this is going to be, we would like to think that. I think we know in our heart of hearts it's not so. But we would like to think that, oh, okay, I can figure out what the end is or the purpose for which God created me, and I'll just begin that right now, and then, whoo, life will be great. Okay, this is more what it looks like. At every moment, we have a whole list of choices and decisions to make, and depending on which decision we make, we have another list of choices to make, and we can end up who knows where. The line is never straight, right? So Ignatius says that every moment we have, in our spiritual practice, in our prayer, we have to hold this big picture up before us. Say, who am I really? At the core, at my I am core. Not what do I do, not where do I live or where am I, but who am I? What's the I am part of me? How do I hold that up and then begin to make choices not only about prayer and spiritual practices, but all the other choices I have to make in life? How do I let the end inform the choices I make now? Well, you'll recognize that since there's no straight line way to do this, that at every point there are all sorts of other options that come into play, right? At every point, I want to ask what will best lead me to be the person God created me to be. And then, for each season of my life, what practices and stances will help me to be the person God created me to be. The reality, and Ignatius says this explicitly in the spiritual exercises when he's laying out this kind of big umbrella. He says, if you have a desire in life only to do the things that lead you to make the most money, for instance, or to be the most successful person you could be, or to make the least money, you know, whether your ambition is to be high or low, or somewhere in between, you're liable to miss this sense of who God created you to be. Because there are other factors, most of the factors which have to do with the where circle and the what circle, that begin to pinch who we are. We begin to make our decisions about things. We begin to make our discernment about things based on these other factors in life. So it's very, very common for us in life when we face a job change, for instance, to say, oh, okay, here's the money I was making at the current job, and this is the money I could make at this job. This is the place I'm living now. This is the place I would be living if I take the other job. So these factors begin to play in. I'm not saying that any of those factors are unimportant. They're important in their own way. But Ignatius of Loyola is saying there's another larger picture, another umbrella that we have to consider if we're going to live the kind of life that brings healing and meaning to the world. And the questions that we're asking are not questions that have to do with our own ego, with our own desires, but how can I be the person God created me to be? Ignatius says things in his 2 or 3 paragraphs about this, like you can't decide based solely on money, or solely on the need to be famous, or solely on the need to be in charge, or to be well liked, or to be exceedingly happy. If you go through life making only the choices that are going to make you what Ignatius calls exceedingly happy, then there's kind of a dynamic about what it means to be happy, and you may miss your original purpose, he says. Even good things can cause you to miss this person that God created you to be. Now, the other part of this is that as we're in each one of these, you know, those kinds of choices and decisions trying to get to the end for which God created us, Ignatius says, even in all of that, God is constantly creating us. And so the second big idea for Ignatius is that God's creation of you and me is never completed. That we are always in process. We are always becoming, and I love this word becoming. We are always becoming the person God created us to be. Or the word Rilke, the poet, uses the word unfolding. We are always unfolding. We are constantly unfolding. growing to be the person that God created us to be. God's ongoing creation of you shapes you moment by moment to be more receptive to God's design so that you're always unfolding and becoming. And prayer and spiritual practices till the soil of our lives. They tenderize our hearts so that we don't get hard, but so that we stay receptive to this ongoing work of God. So at every moment we have these choices, this complex web of choices. This isn't a straight line path. I just threw it in again because I was really happy with it and wanted you to see it again. Now, what happens to us when, okay, we follow this path and then we follow this and we follow that and we keep going down here? Is it possible to find our way back? My hunch is to find our way back to my end, or the purpose of my creation, who God created me to be. My hunch is, yes, it's possible, but I can't say that I've had the experience of that, and I won't be able to say it until I die. I'll come back and tell you. Or you come back and tell me if you go before I do. My hunch is that we can never go so far away that we can't make it back. But at some point, it seems as if we have to begin to turn our face back toward that which helps us to enter into this person that God created us to be. One of the ways I've been helped in this is by the poet David White, who does seminars. He's an English poet, but he lives in the Seattle area. And he does seminars using poetry for big corporations in the Northwest, like Boeing and whoever else is Microsoft, or I think he's done some AT&T maybe. And so he speaks to corporations about how to do your work in the workplace with soul. And he talks in one of his CDs about doing a poetry workshop for one of these corporations. And a woman in the workshop wrote a line of poetry about something in her life, but the tagline was, "I turned my face for a moment and it became my life." I turned my face for a moment and it became my life. You see, that's I turned my face and I turned my face and it became my life, and it just became, okay? My experience of that, not my experience, but my experience, I've probably done it a lot myself, but a few months ago in our church in Rogers, Arkansas, the associate pastor was preaching a sermon one Sunday morning, and the senior pastor was gone. Associate pastor was preaching. He's a new preacher. He's a second career preacher, and he's learning to preach. And so for the cover of the worship bulletin, he used this graphic, this image, and the title of his sermon was "Keep on Trucking." And it's an older congregation, so we figured, those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, we would recognize this, right? See, I can tell in the room who recognizes it now and how old you are. You've already given away your age. And, this was kind of a common poster and a T-shirt and a bumper sticker back in the 60s and 70s, "Keep on Trucking." And it had some association with a guy named Eddie Kendrick, and also some association with the Grateful Dead. So I'm talking to a fellow that I had just met a couple of weeks before in the church after the service, and he's carrying the worship bulletin with this image on it, and he's highly extroverted, and he always wants to talk. And so he came up to me and he said, "I had this poster on my wall growing up." And so we started to talk about this, and he said, "I was a deadhead." Now, yeah, those of you nodding know that. The rest of you are going, "What in the world is a deadhead?" So a deadhead in the 60s and 70s was a person who followed the Grateful Dead, California, I think San Francisco band, with a very alternative kind of, I don't know if you call it rock, I don't know what it was, but it was very kind of revoltish, revolutionary, very countercultural, you know, if we're going to stick it to the man kind of deal. You know, that was the Grateful Dead. And the Deadheads were people who either kind of followed the Grateful Dead by listening to their albums, but the real Deadheads were the ones who went from city to city to their concerts. And they created these buses, these old school buses that they painted kind of hippie colors in the 60s and early 70s. They painted them hippie colors, and everybody would load onto a Deadhead bus and they'd drive to the next concert and hear the Grateful Dead, or the Dead, they just called them the Dead, hear the Dead play, and then after the concert they all got in the bus and they went to the next venue and heard the Dead play again. So my friend in Rogers, Arkansas said, I was a Deadhead, and we're talking about this image. Now, this is a little degree of separation, but I'm going to tell you how we got here. Part of my practice the last few months has been doing Lectio Divina with songs that I hear, picking out a lyric and just sitting with it. So, for instance, there's a lyric in Crosby, Stills, Nash, Southern Cross, near the end of the song, the last stanza, where David Crosby sings, "And we never failed to fail, it was the easiest thing to do." And I've lived with that for a couple of weeks. I've never failed to fail. It was the easiest thing to do. It was a Yes song. I've seen All Good People. I listened to it in my room at Joe and Carol's last night. It was just on a playlist I had. I didn't expect it to come up. The chorus of I've Seen All Good People says, "Don't surround yourself with yourself. Go on back 2 squares." The song is built around a chess imagery, but the lyric is, don't surround yourself with yourself. That's about as good advice as you'll ever get. Don't surround yourself with yourself. So when my friend comes up to me in the church, after church, and we're talking about the Grateful Dead, I had been working with a lyric from a Don Henley song, The Boys of Summer. The last stanza of The Boys of Summer, Don Henley says, "Out on the road today, I saw a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. A little voice inside my head said, don't look back, don't ever look back." And so I said to my friend, do you know this lyric? He's told me he was a Deadhead. Out on the road today, I saw a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. Well, you get the image, a Deadhead, revolutionary, countercultural, I want to upset the system, on a Cadillac, driving down the road. See, those 2 things don't mix. My friend says to me, I was a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. And then he told me a story. He went from being a Deadhead, well, he still considered himself a Deadhead, but he took a job in a major corporation in the Bentonville, Arkansas area. You figure it out. And he said, I was the Deadhead sticker on the Cadillac. He was making money, had prestige. Inside him lived the Deadhead. I don't know if he literally drove a Cadillac or not, but the image fit. He had turned his head for a moment, and it became his life. I said, is there an end to the story? He said, yeah. I quit that job. I said, what are you doing now? He said, I'm an artisan. That was his I am. That is his I am center. Now, it's possible to turn your head for a moment. We can find our way back, I sense. My friend said so, and I think it's true. This is part of our story. This is part of the journey. The road is not straight, and it's not ever level. Oh, there's the lyric. And I'm not going to sing it for you. So what are the spiritual practices that will help you see the truth, see the reality, see more clearly God, self, others, and the world. What is the end for which God created you? A few weeks ago, thinking about our time this weekend, I just sat with my journal and started writing some possibilities. There are hundreds, thousands, millions of possibilities. I just kind of picked some things to write that, thinking that if any one of these just stirred within one person in the crowd, then this is worth it. Were you created to explore the terrain? The physical terrain or the terrain of the soul? To be a sister to those who are alone? To befriend the world? To bring things and people together? To illumine and shine in the darkness? To speak on behalf of the voiceless? To create beauty? To offer a healing presence to the world? To love all things? Were you created simply to dig for treasure, to be a companion, to walk with those who are lost, to seek out the outsider, to make a home for the wanderer? Whatever it is for you, then the questions are, what gets me to this end? What do I need to subtract or jettison, let go of? And what do I need to take on? What do I need to explore? So what I've wanted to say in this session is that these spiritual practices are a part of this larger umbrella that transcends the season of Lent. This is not something that we do for 40 days. This is lifetime work. Okay? This is big work. It's a part of our larger pattern of becoming the people God created us to be, the person God created us to be. So what's going to get you there? And that's what we've said last night and today. You have to figure that out in your own experience. It may be a prayer of intercession or praying intercessory prayer, creating a prayer list. It may be a meditative sit. It may mean walking your dog. It may be doing collage, writing poetry, reading poetry. It may be engaging a work that, which you continually fail. It may be a morning breathing meditation that you carry into your shower. It may be sitting alone in the woods, putting your hands in the garden soil, having coffee with a soul friend. Maybe several of those, maybe something completely different. But this is spiritual work that transcends Lent, okay? And that's really what I want you to hear in this, and that's why I wanted to give the big frame of this Ignatian work. Two things I want to give you just in closing before we have dialogue and some questions. First, from Mother Teresa and some of her thoughts on different ways of both letting go and engaging in some practices that are helpful spiritually. Mother Teresa talks about all of these different kinds of silences in the language of silence. And she says this in the sense that this is what she was trying to do. This was her own practice. And again, you don't have to write all this down. We'll send the PowerPoint to you. She says, practice silence of the eyes by seeking always the beauty and goodness of God everywhere and closing them to the faults of others and to all that is sinful and disturbing to the soul. Practice silence of the ears by listening always to the voice of God and to the cry of the poor and the needy, and closing them to all other voices that come from fallen human nature, such as gossip, tale-bearing, and uncharitable words. Practice silence of the tongue by praising God and speaking the life-giving word of God that is the truth, that enlightens and inspires, brings peace, hope, and joy. and by refraining from self-defense and every word that causes darkness, turmoil, pain, and death. Practice silence of the mind by opening it to the truth and knowledge of God in prayer and contemplation, like Mary, who pondered the marvels of the Lord in her heart, and by closing it to all untruths, distractions, destructive thoughts, rash judgments, false suspicions of others, vengeful thoughts, and desires. Practice silence of the heart by loving God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving one another as God loves, and avoiding all selfishness, hatred, envy, jealousy, and greed. I shall keep the silence of my heart with greater care, so that in the silence of my heart I hear his words of comfort, and from the fullness of my heart I comfort Jesus in the distressing disguise of the poor, for in the silence and purity of the heart God speaks. So what Mother Teresa has given us in the silence of the head, the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the heart, is a way of letting go of something, but also taking on something else. Some of the Ash Wednesday service that I attended at noon on 3 days ago had a litany on fasting but feasting, letting go of this but taking on this. Okay, and that's the spirit in which she's written. The last thing I want to do with you before Victor comes up and we begin to close is a poem on page 14. This has become my favorite poem for closing this kind of experience. It's a poem at the bottom, again, by the Persian poet Rumi, called Isn't That Something? And he says simply, I like when the music happens like this. Something in his eye grabs hold of a tambourine in me. Then I turn and lift a violin in someone else. And they turn, and this turning continues. It has somehow reached you now. Isn't that something? I like when something in his eye grabs a hold of a tambourine in me. And then I, in turn, lift a violin in someone else. And they turn, and this turning continues. It has now reached you. Isn't that something? And so the invitation as we go is for you to take the tambourine, but then to help someone else lift their violin, so that that person then turns to help someone else. And that's the way the world is saved. That's the way the world is redeemed. Okay. All right. Victor, I'm toast.
So if you have any questions, Victoria and Liz will go around and pick up some of the cards, and I don't promise we'll get to all of them, but the ones that we do get to, we'll answer, and then once we don't, I'll get with Jerry, and then he'll reply for me and send me an email.
Not you.
One of them is, where do I go to listen to your podcasts? No, that's got to happen. I think that's got to happen.
That's got to happen?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
got to happen.
Okay.
I've been encouraging him to get on the Facebook, because I think this kind of wisdom. No, I'm trying to encourage him to get on social media, because I always tell him this kind of wisdom has to be heard, and we have to have access to it. So we're there. We're working on that.
There are days that I feel more courageous in that than others.
I'm persuading him for us to do that. As a beginner, I guess, beginning this kind of awareness or spirituality, is there a one book that you would recommend about prayer and spiritual practices? Yeah, I know.
There have been significant books for me at different times. I would say that if you're drawn to this and you're at an event like this, and you would want to kind of step into this, I would recommend Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. He's a Franciscan priest in Albuquerque. Richard Rohr and his book, Everything Belongs. And he talks in that book about a different way of seeing, a different stance, and talks about prayer not as an act, but as a way of being, as a stance. Now, most everything Richard Rohr writes is good, but that I think is a good entry, a good way in. And there are other people in the room who've probably experienced other books that I'm just blanking out on right now.
Yeah, one of the books that helped me in the beginning, and you probably don't remember recommending this one, but it was recommended by Jerry, Out of Solitude by Henry Nouwen. And it was a short read, and it definitely, it prompted me to go deeper, and that was an excellent recommendation.
Yeah. There are a lot of books by Henry Nouwen. Henry Nouwen tends to be a little more accessible. Mm-hmm. You can get lost a little bit in Richard Rohr sometimes, not all the time. But Nouwen is just, people read Henry Nouwen and feel like, that guy knows me. And he writes not simplistically, but simply.
Yes.
In a very understandable way. And he's not lost in himself. So
that's right.
Most anything by Nouwen is good too.
Yeah.
The Way of the Heart by Nouwen is an excellent book. Mm-hmm. Good entry. He talks about, in The Way of the Heart, he has sections on silence, solitude, and prayer. Mm-hmm. And he organizes some thoughts around those three kind of classic practices.
Correct. If you were missing some from your library, I took them.
I am missing some, and I wondered where they went.
Just letting you know.
I just said that to somebody last week. I used to have this book, and I can't find it.
And your notes and highlighted were very helpful.
Wow. Need everybody to leave right after this because we're going to have a woodshed moment.
You notice I told him 10 years later, right? How can we be sure what our end is? Isn't the end today defined by where we are, what we are today? What if our real end is much more than what we see today?
I'd say yes, definitely it is much more than you see today. But if you wait until you see the totality of what it is, you'll never begin. Because you're not ever going to see the totality of what it is. So to lean into another T.S. Eliot poem, he says, most of the time in this journey we go by hints and guesses, hints and guesses. And so the spirit of an explorer says, okay, it seems to be this today, and I'm going to try that out. And we get into it, and as we get into it, either it evolves a little differently than we thought it would at the beginning, or we sense that this really isn't what I thought it was, and so I make a new beginning somewhere else. But that's the Rumi poem again, jump in the flow, just jump in somewhere, because if you stand on the sidelines and wait till you've got it all figured out up here, you'll never jump in. Because it's always going to be more than you can imagine at this moment. Okay? The way I say that, if I don't have it written down, but the spiritual journey is going to take you to a place you cannot imagine. And it's going to take you there by a road you would not have chosen. Now, the first half of that says the journey is going to take you to a place you cannot imagine. So if you can imagine the end from here and say, this is exactly what it's going to be, then you've got it wrong from the beginning. So you step into the mystery and you step into the darkness of it and say, well, I'm just going to try. So I go by hints and guesses, and, I kind of think this might be it. Some things that I said 15 or 18 years ago when I taught that first Spiritual Foundations class at Chapelwood, and I said something about what I sensed my kind of original purpose was. Well, I'm now 17 years down the road, and there's still a little of that in there, but that's not totally, that's evolved. I'm becoming, okay? I'm unfolding. And so I can never say in any moment now with assurance what that is. But that doesn't stop me from getting on the path and trying something out, okay? If that makes sense. So don't, this sense of being assured, don't worry about being assured. Just jump in the flow, buy something. Buy something.
That.
Yeah.
And this is the last one. Reference to Jesus is inviting Martha to cook in a merry way. If Martha loves to cook and be a hostess, then I understand the above comment. If Martha doesn't love to cook or her task, how does she reconcile Mary sitting with Jesus and not helping?
Yeah, I don't know how she reconciles it. I know what's bugging her. So whether she was cooking or not, cooking, I think in the landscape of this, cooking is kind of over here. It's a side issue. The issue is, what is Martha carrying in her purse? What's in her sack? And so whether she's cooking or not, there's something there of worry and distraction and resentment at Mary. So cooking's not the real issue. Whatever she does, she's looking over her shoulder, and this sense, some of you have heard me say, the twin killers in the spiritual life are competition and comparison. Competing with someone else and comparing yourself to somebody else. As if the standard for where I'm supposed to be, I can measure the standard for where I'm supposed to be by where somebody else is. Now, competition and comparison are highly valued in our culture. And so all of us have to continually watch those things. But I think that's part of what Martha's caught up in. She's comparing what she's doing, or comparing where she is and resentful, to where Mary is and what Mary's doing. And there's this little undercurrent of, oh yeah, I'd like to be at Jesus' feet too, but we have to eat. So it's what she carries in her purse that's the issue, not the fact that she's cooking.
Yeah. Wow, thank you so much.
I mean, that's my perspective.
No, we love your perspective. Just a few things before we dismiss. I will email the Jerry slides, and somebody did come up to me that they didn't get the ones from last year, so I'll attach those as well, just in case you did not get them. I also want to say a couple of thank yous to our media crew. If you see the camera back there, we have been videoing the conference, so I'm going to get together with our team and edit and do a compilation of Jerry's lectures, and we'll have those on link, and I'll send those to you as soon as they're ready to go, and I'll also email that along to you. And the idea is to have it on our website as well, so people can always chime into that. I want to thank Liz and Victoria. They did a wonderful job with registration, selling books, getting questions, going for coffee. And actually, I want to thank Nina, because Nina is the one that treated us for coffee this morning. So thank you, Nina. The other thing, too, we want to tell you, Jerry, you talked about the deadheads. Well, we're going to get together and be the Weber heads and probably raise some money to get a bus and go to Arkansas, wherever he's teaching, right? And lastly, 2 years ago, I had the honor to go to Arkansas along with John and be part of a 5-day retreat, and Jerry got to teach. So I was very enthusiastic about this retreat and the fact that he was going to be there. Anyways, as I always voice out my just the privilege to be so close to him, and the fact that I've followed him, I'm a Weber head, and so in that retreat, there were so many things that were happening that I was inspired by. And poetry has always been something that he's invited all of us that have known him for a long time to explore. And so with that being said, he inspired for me to write a poem about him. So I'm going to embarrass you for a little bit. And this is what I wrote about Jerry. My beloved brother and teacher, I sit and ponder, how did you do it? How did you manage to tame my restless spirit? It was through the many teachings that you passionately share. God called you many years ago to your own awakening, and what a beautiful story it is. Thank you for accepting the invitation to follow me from Jesus. Thank you for allowing the love divine to mold you into a wise rabbi of the contemplative life. Thank you for surrendering and unfolding. Thank you for inviting many of us to consider the life of love and selflessness. Roar, Merton, Teresa de Avila, Keating, Nowen, and many others who are brother, sister, conspirators, and teachers of the spiritual path. But Weber is not only my brother, my teacher, but he is my beloved friend. Thank you for not settling to be just a shopkeeper pastor. Thank you for allowing yourself to be used to make an impact in the world. You've inspired me to do the same. I love you very much, brother. Thank you so much, and what an honor to have him here. Thank you so much, Jerry. Love you so much, man. So the idea is that we will have him back again, and that's for sure. More often. Now we got to talk about my budget. No, I'm just teasing. I'm teasing.
Can I just throw out my
yes,
email address?
Absolutely.
I didn't put a slide. My email address, if you want to stay in touch, is jerryweber09. It's Jerry, Weber with 2 B's, 09@gmail.com. And I put out periodic information on email to people who ask to be on the list, so I don't assume that anybody wants to get stuff from me. So if you want to be on that email list, send me an email and I'll add you to the list. But it has information about retreats I'm leading that are open, and some of these, I'm doing a couple more of those 5-day things coming up. And so if you want to be on that list, send me an email and I'll make sure you get on the list and get that information.
And I'll add that to the email that I'll send out
thanks.
as well, with your blog link as well. The only other thing I have for you is ask you to do me a favor and clear your tables and throw out the trash before you leave. And let's close in prayer right quick. Our gracious God, we're thankful to you. We thank you for Jerry, his words. And as we individually decide to buy something, give us that courage to step into it and to know that we are not alone and that your presence accompanies us. Whatever that is, meet us where we need to be met. And we thank you so much that we are able to count on your presence and that we are able to be carried by your love. And we just ask you that we remain in this type of reflection on a daily basis, that we can get in touch with your presence and guide us and teach us of how to apply it and how to be a voice to our broken world. All this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Go in peace. Thank you so much.